This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Coveil. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. I always love the unexpected way this show unfolds. Dateline, June 2015. I'm in Beijing, China. Me and about 1,500, 1,000, somewhere in that neighborhood, Chinese investors. I was there to present. Me and one other white guy there to present, Larry Williams, famed trader Larry Williams. It was my first time meeting Larry. We had a chance to share dinner with our Chinese hosts. And Larry brought up with me his son, Dr. Jason Williams, who has a book on the mental side of trading, the psych side of things. So Larry tells me this in June of 2015. I forget about it. Many months unfold. I come across Jason Williams and his book. And I'm thinking, wow, what great content. Light bulb moment. This is Larry's son. This is what Larry was telling me about. It had completely escaped me. The dots were not connecting. I did not see the connection. I see the connection now. I hope you enjoy this episode with Dr. Jason Williams. Speaking of small world, the reason this conversation came to be, well, it should have come to be based on a conversation that I had with your father in Beijing in June, because we were talking this type of content, the mental edge trading. But somehow or another, it escaped my mind. There was somebody else. I did a casting call for guests, and like several other random people in my life were like, hey, you need to talk to Jason Williams. And even then, I don't think I connected the dots. And I was like, oh, you know what? I think this is what Larry was telling me. So it took me only many months to figure out and piece together. And I must say, for those people, and this is kind of a side conversation, because everything we're going to talk about today is kind of standalone work in your world. Just so happens that you're the son of Larry Williams. But what's really interesting for me, having only met Larry that one time in Beijing in June, what a magnificent street magician that man is.
Yeah, well, if you have to see the same tricks over and over for your whole lifetime, it's still not. I enjoy the showmanship and the reaction and how much he enjoys doing it. But my role is to really sort of try to catch him in his tricks and see where he's slipping up. So when he goes before a new audience, he can perform well. So I actually prefer that role. I like to try to find out how the tricks are done and to purposely slip him up or throw a monkey wrench into his trick. So that's my role. But yes, I think if he had his choice, he would be a professional magician.
It's interesting you say that you try to trip him up. Figuratively, in some ways, I look at your work that we're going to talk about today, the mental edge in trading. I look at it in many ways that you were looking at your father, a successful trader, and then decomposing, breaking down, deconstructing the parts, what was going on the mental side. Why don't you talk about how you give a little bit of your background in terms of your medical training, but how did you start to have this inspiration or this direction to go with this particular work and all the research you've done?
Yeah, well, it would not have gone in this direction if it wasn't my father who asked about this whole topic, and it just kind of started things off. But, my medical career was a second career. I used to be kind of a business guy living and working out of China, actually, for over a decade. I was involved with pharmaceutical research and import and export with China and developing different types of vaccines and such. And it got me more interested in medicine. So I had a career change where I went off into medical school. I impulsively went off to, there's a good psychological word. I impulsively decided to go to medical school one day without any sort of prior conception of that might ever happen. and then as I was going through medical school and just, looking at all the various organs and the systems in the body, I just fell in love with the brain and how it works, and, the emotions and the behaviors and the thoughts of individuals, and how everyone's unique. And yet there are a lot of common themes as well, and how to help people. I just fell in love with psychiatry. It was a no-brainer, no pun intended, that I would go into psychiatry instead of studying the kidneys or the heart or something like that.
I can offer for the audience out there, and I hope this doesn't scare the audience, but the Mental Edge in Trading, your first work, this is not light reading. This is dense. There's some density here, yes?
Well, not only density, but let's also throw in scientific validity too, because I went to I completed my medical school education at George Washington, and went on to do my psychiatry training at Johns Hopkins, which happens to be one of not only the top psychiatry programs in the country, but they are very rigorous when it comes to the psychological training of psychiatrists as well. Unlike a lot of other training programs, they actually train their psychiatrists in doing personality testing and helping. And that's something that a lot of psychiatrists don't do. A lot of times that's more in the psychological realm. But it just happens to be that the person who invented, the co-inventor of the most scientifically validated and rigorous personality inventory or test is at Hopkins, and he trained me. And so it just, fortuitously, that led to from one thing to the next. And so it was actually during residency training, after having learned about the personality traits and how to test people, not with Myers-Briggs and those kind of psychobabble tests, but actual real scientific tests. It was after learning that my dad just happened to ask me one day, "Hey, what do you think makes a great trader?" And he really initiated the actual body of work. It was that question. It was not something that was on my mind. I probably never would have, if I didn't have, Larry Williams to be my father, I probably never would have, be talking to you here, obviously. And so, just one thing leads to another. And it actually went, as I was still in residency, I started working on a research project. Every resident needs to have I was involved with multiple research projects, but this was sort of my senior year research project as a resident at Hopkins, was actually giving the standardized personality inventory to a group of very successful, long-term successful traders, not just people who necessarily manage money or oversee money, but actual traders, and see if there were any common themes or what we could find out from them. It went from sort of a question that my dad had to a research project in residency, and then as we got more and more interesting results, we started talking and writing about it, and pretty soon McGraw-Hill got interested in what we were doing, and they asked me to do a book on it. So we put everything into a book, and it's led, one thing leads to another. I've given presentations at the MTA in New York, and in Tokyo, in Seattle, and online seminars all over the world. And I actually, with no intention of doing it, have sort of built up a little side business of consulting traders all over the world about how to adapt their personality traits to a trading methodology that's more effective for them.
I'm going to break apart some basic issues, work our way forward to the personality research and some personality understanding and education you can pass along to the audience. One thing I would like to add, because I think you just made an interesting comment. I am a guy. Obviously, I have, well, not obviously, but I have no training, no academic training. But many, many moons ago, a young lady convinced me to go sit through a couple days of learning how to administer the Myers-Briggs instrument. I never really got too much out of it, but I did feel like the understanding of things like extroversion, introversion, and sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving, I thought these were useful, but you're the guy that's got the severe education in this field. Why don't you pick the Myers-Briggs apart for a second?
Let's start with some of the research. So when people have given the Myers-Briggs to individuals, and then they re-give it a second time, even just weeks later, 50% of the time the results are different. All right? And so that kind of shows you that there's no validity to it. 50% of the time the results are different, which is very unlike the personality tests that we use in our research and the researchers use, which are consistent not only weeks, but over years and decades and throughout a lifetime. that the results stay the same. So the Myers-Briggs, have you ever heard of the Fourier effect by any chance?
No, explain it.
Sure. The Fourier effect is it's sometimes referred to as the Barnum effect, as in P.T. Barnum, and it's an effect that's used by astrologists and psychics, where if you give anybody sort of vague information about themselves, they will generally tend to agree with it. And that's what generally, for the most part, that's what the Myers-Briggs does. There's only one of the traits on the Myers-Briggs, and that's the extroversion trait, that is actually scientifically validated. The rest of them are not validated, and they're all positive. It's a test that is used a lot by human resources departments of companies, because it generally gives a glowing distinction to people who take it. There are no negative connotations in the questions that are asked on it, and so it's used to sort of bolster people's confidence in themselves more often than really understanding their personality. So Fourier was actually a psychologist back in the 1940s who actually, what he did is he gave a bunch of people a personality test, and then he gave everybody the same identical results, and everybody seemed to agree that, yeah, this really describes me to a T. But what he really did was just pull out some random information from an astrology book he bought at a newsstand, gave everybody the same results, and everybody said, yeah, this test is great. And so that's largely actually what the Myers-Briggs does. And what many people don't know is it's a little bit, I don't want to, I don't want to use the word scam, but one of the board members of the company that runs that test, actually in an interview with the Washington Post, he himself said he would never use that test in his own research because his colleagues would laugh at him if he did. So it's just not the test that people use. It's also a binary test, and this is something really critical I hope that your listeners will get from this, is binary means yes or no. And so you're either an extrovert or an introvert. It doesn't look at things any more detailed than that. And the reality is that something like extroversion, everything is on an extreme, but everything is on a spectrum to one degree or another, or maybe to an extreme. Somebody may be an extrovert or an introvert, but some people are in the middle. The best analogy that I can use to dimensional personality traits like extroversion would be to look at something we're more used to thinking about, like human height. If you look at everybody across the world and measure their height, you'll get a bell-shaped curve of tall people, short people, and most people are kind of in the middle part of the curve. And you really want to look at the people who are at the extremes of the bell-shaped curve, because that's where you either run into problems or where it can really be to your advantage as well. And so let's look at a couple sports figures. Think of like Yao Ming, the Chinese basketball player, and Victor Espinoza, the jockey who won the Triple Crown earlier this year. So, right, their heights are very different. Yao Ming, built to be a basketball player. Victor Espinoza, built to be a jockey. And if they tried to reverse their jobs, it would not work well. And so those people just happen to realize that their physical attributes adapted to a certain thing. Same thing goes with personality traits. So it's not just a matter of whether you're tall or short, but how tall are you and how short are you? And more importantly, if you're short and you're trying to, adapt to life circumstances, like, well, let's say your favorite brand of peanut butter is on the top shelf and you can't reach it at the supermarket, like, how do you adapt to that? What do you do to compensate? Are you going to buy some elevator shoes or whatever the solution may be? So that's kind of the analogy with personality traits as well, and that the Myers-Briggs doesn't even look at. It just says you're introverted or extroverted, or you're tall or you're short, and it doesn't give you any kind of a measurement to compare you to the rest of society. And that's what the NEO, which is the abbreviated name of the test that we used in our research, that's what it specifically does. And it's been demonstrated to be valid across all countries and socioeconomic populations around the world. It's been translated in all kinds of languages and verified, and it's got more research behind it than I would ever care to even read, because you could spend a lifetime.
Before you even go into the NEO, and since I've opened up personality here, we're going to go down this path for right now. We'll circle back on some issues. Let's talk about personality for a moment, because, okay, we're going to learn in our conversation today, the audience is going to learn there is a very scientific way, as you just mentioned, that one can evaluate a personality, determine a certain type of personality. Talk big picture for a moment. Okay, so once we know our personality, and like I said, in a minute here, I want you to break apart the Neo, but once we know our personality, then what? Ultimately, the mental edge in trading, so the audience is probably already thinking, okay, once I know my personality, then what? Is there a bad personality? Is there a good personality? Or is it a matter of, once we know our personality, it's a matter of making the proper adjustments if we need to, as opposed to saying, okay, I scored on the test that Jason's talking about, the Neo, and my personality is this. That means I can't do something. It's not that, right?
Right, it's not that. And there is no such thing as a bad personality or a wrong personality. There are different personalities, and everybody obviously, well, I know some people who don't have any personality, actually, Mike. But for the most part, everybody has a personality, and everybody is unique. That was a joke. It is about understanding. So when I first took this test, there was one personality trait on it that I vehemently disagreed about. I complained to the person who wrote this test and has written all kinds of research papers, and I said, this is not true. The test showed that I was an impulsive person. And I said, no, I pride myself in being somebody who's not impulsive, and this is wrong. Your test is wrong. It's missing something. It's not really understanding me. And he said, no, I'm the one who's wrong. And he literally threw a large stack of research papers on the table in front of me, and it went thud. And he said, read all this, then come back to me and talk to me about it. And instead of reading all that, I did something else. And that was, I kept more of an open eye and ear to myself to see if I was impulsive and where and how I was impulsive. And over the years since I've taken that test, and also looking back at other times in my life, like impulsively going off to medical school and things like that, I realized, hey, I am a lot more impulsive than other people. I didn't recognize it. So sometimes this test, for a lot of people, this test there are no eye-opening shockers. For a lot of people, it's yeah, I kind of knew that I was this and that, but it shows them a relative degree. For other people, there really are some aha surprise moments, and sometimes that surprise moment's not when they look at the results, but only after a little bit of time to really think and talk to other people and reflect, people who know them, and then they realize hey, yeah, this is a problem. I never noticed it. So just an awareness, first of all, is the most important thing. And there, a lot of times people say, hey, I have a bad personality, or they get their results in the mail and they're so embarrassed. They paid for an hour consultation with me and they never even want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed. And I feel bad because it's not a matter of embarrassment. It's not a matter of right or wrong. So evolutionary psychology, which is sort of a discipline, says that these personality traits over the centuries and millennia, that they are stable, and that there's a reversion to the mean. It's a statistical term, but revision towards the mean. But that most people are in the middle with these personality traits, and some people are at the extremes, and those extremes can get you in trouble, or they can be like Yao Ming, super tall, slam dunk millions of times and make millions of dollars in the NBA. The problem is, you're Yao Ming, you go to the mall, you might have money flowing out of your pockets, but you're going to have to duck every time you walk through a doorway, and you can't buy a suit that fits you easily. And even if you're in first class on an airplane, you're pretty cramped. So, it's more of an understanding, what are my traits, personality traits? Where am I on the dimension? Which are the ones that are really surprising to me? And how can I use this to my advantage, not just in trading, but in life in general, relationships, work, all sorts of things. How can I use them to my advantage, and how are they getting in the way? And so that's where you go next once you understand really where you fall on these dimensions.
Jason, let's break this apart specifically for people. So the Neo, it's a 5-factor model as you described. Why don't you break down those 5 factors in brief, describe the main term and what each means in context for the audience?
Sure. So they're referred to as the big 5 sometimes. But then sometimes they're broken down to the big three, and that's where the term neo comes from, N-E-O. But really, if you look at the big five, it would be N-E-O, A, and C. Neuroticism is the N, extroversion is the E, O is for openness, A is for agreeableness, and conscientiousness is the C. Neuroticism is not like what somebody would think of Woody Allen as always being just a little jittery and neurotic. That's not what researchers and scientists mean by neuroticism. Somebody can be stone cold, cool, calm under normal circumstances, and then something challenges them or provokes them, and all of a sudden negative emotions come out fast and furiously. That's neuroticism. Like somebody who gets into a minor fender bender on the road, right before the fender bender, they may have been perfectly calm, but as soon as there's a little incident or something happens that was unexpected, they may fly into a rage or become depressed or anxious or have some sort of negative emotion that just flares up really fast and furiously. That's neuroticism.
But this is on a scale, so we're all a little neurotic to some degree or another, right?
Everybody is neurotic to some degree or another. Some people are, we all have, so neuroticism is just we all have the same emotions, and including all the negative emotions. So neuroticism is looking at how one tends to experience, how quickly and strongly one experiences negative emotions. So we all have anger, fear, sadness, those kinds of negative emotions, depression, those kinds of vulnerability, those kind of negative emotions everyone has. Is just to what degree are you on the low end of the spectrum, and which is not necessarily a good thing, right? You don't want to necessarily be too low. I'm not talking about trading right now, by the way. We'll come back to the results when you get to traders. Things are a little bit different, but just in the general population, in society, in the world, you don't want to be too high or too low. At least according to the laws of evolutionary psychology, that most people that are under the middle part of the bell-shaped curve for a reason, that's advantageous. You want to have some degree of negative emotions so that you're aware when negative circumstances, and so you can get out of the way when there's a lion around the corner and all those kind of fight and flight types of reactions. That if you're too low in those emotions, that it can be problematic. But that if you're too high in negative emotions, that it basically overwhelms, drowns out sort of the logical, rational side to your brain. On a sidebar note here, it's really important for people to understand that the brain is, although you might hear about the left and the right side of the brain, that is not where you want to be spending your time thinking about. Really, the brain is thought of as the outside part of the brain and the inside part of the brain. Those are the two sides of the brain. The outside being the logical, intellectual part, and that's your cortex, and that's the newer or the neocortex. And then the inner part of your brain, or the subcortex, is where all of your emotions and memories and sort of innate responses are. That's the inside part of your brain. When people have high levels of neuroticism, negative emotions, super high ones, it sort of drowns out or overwhelms sort of the logical, rational side of your brain. I'm sure your listeners can already, understand in trading where that kind of comes into play. So, but by and large, you don't want to be on too far of the extreme one way or the other. Although when it comes to trading, we found some interesting results. I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit. But that's what neuroticism is. Extroversion is not necessarily just, are you the party goer? Are you the life of the party? That's kind of part of extroversion, but there's more to it than that, actually. Extroversion is really whether somebody has an internal or external locus of control, or how much of it. Everybody has some degree of extroversion. No one's a complete island and a total hermit, but it's how quickly you warm up around other people and how much you enjoy being. And it's really, do external things stimulate you and make you happy, or do more internal things stimulate and make you happy? And again, it's on a spectrum. Openness is how open you are to new ideas and to trying new things. My dad happens to be like the highest person. He's off the charts with openness, by the way. So that's great because he experiences all kinds of things in life, and he's done all kinds of unimaginable things. But on the other hand, that he's prone to being being open to things that maybe get him in trouble, and he would be the first one to admit to that. And I've had to work with him, and he's really made some strides on that, in understanding that sometimes he's too open. It's gotten him into some all kinds of issues. Agreeableness, the A, is how easily you get along with others, is probably the easiest way to understand it. And then conscientiousness is just how much of a rule follower and how detail-oriented you are. So those are your 5 main big traits. Again, those, they're scientifically validated across all parts of society, races, genders, etc. Now, it goes a little bit deeper than that, because actually each one of those 5 traits, Mike, has 6 sub-traits. And so, for example, neuroticism, there's N1, N2, N3, N4, N5, and N6, and each one is a different negative emotion. Same thing with the extroversion and the openness and the group. Each one has 6. So if you add them up, there are 30 total. What that means is you might be low in some parts of neuroticism and high in others, and maybe sort of normal in others. And same thing with extroversion. And so other personality tests really don't get into that sort of depth as this one does. They just look at the broad brushstrokes. This personality test actually breaks them down into the sub-traits, or facets as they're referred to usually, and looks at sort of the individual components of the 5 main personality traits.
What's the process? I can remember, as you've already laid out pretty clearly for the audience, that they should not be running around their office environment wearing their 4-letter score on their heart from the Myers-Briggs instrument, like that somehow there is defining them for the rest of their life, which is commonly done in a lot of places. But why don't you talk about the process of this NEO test? Is it just a Q&A type thing? What is how do you get the result? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's a test that is owned by a company, so it's not something, it's a very protected test. There are a lot of sort of copycat tests online that try to mimic it, but really have never been validated, so you don't know if you're really getting the right thing. And so you really want to make sure that you're talking specifically about the NEO PIR, and then there should be a little TM for trademark after it. And there are a lot of copycat tests. Some of them are short versions. None of them are validated, and the ones that are used in research. Okay, so just be careful.
Is it a 100-question test, a 200-question test, 3 hours, an hour? How does it work?
Yeah, I'm getting into that. There are actually a couple different versions. There's a short version and the long version. The long version is the one that looks at all the different facets. It only takes about 45, 50 minutes of time for the average person. It's a test where it goes through a number of questions or really statements where you rate whether you strongly agree, or neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree to the statement. Okay, so it's not yes or no. That's where sort of the dimensional part comes from, is that you're not just answering yes I am or no I'm not, but how much. And each one of these questions has been worded in a very specific way. There are a lot of built-in mechanisms to the test to make sure that somebody's either not providing artifactual or false answers, or that there's some test taking errors as well. So you need to kind of make sure that somebody's taking the test appropriately, and there are built-in checks and balances in the test. So, but the test is available both as an electronic version, not online, but I guess if a psychologist or psychiatrist has a computer station, somebody can take it, or a paper version is available too. I prefer to have my clients take the paper version, and I just send it to them in the mail, and they send it back to me, and I score it and then send them the results. So it's not a painful experience. The questions themselves on the test are pretty irrelevant. Like later on, after I've graded the test and I'm talking to the test taker, we don't look at the questions on the test. They're totally irrelevant. The test questions are just sort of provoking answers and getting into the psychology of the person, but they're irrelevant as far as when it comes time to understanding the results and how to apply them. So we basically even trash the questions. That's not the important part.
Talk about your research and working with traders specifically for this test, because I imagine, given your position, that the one thing that you wish you had more and more of were more and more traders to take this. I mean, the more data you have, the more excited you probably are. I mean, that's probably the biggest weakness in your world, I would guess, is you probably wish you could give every trader and go through the results and just get more and more data, right?
That would be nice. And, I have continued to give the test to traders after, the book's been out a couple years now. And so we've, gone on to test more people. But that would be nice if we could test every trader. And in my book, I don't just test them. I also interview these traders and really understand on a deeper level how these personality traits are affecting their trading and what types of things that they do to compensate. So yes, I would love to test everybody and understand everyone. Obviously not very feasible.
Can I give you an example to let you run with? I'll let you go long form with this example. Ralph Vince. Ralph Vince has been on my show. Ralph Vince is one of the most interesting interviews that I've had. A really interesting guy, and that's probably saying it mildly. Why don't you take as an example, Ralph, talk about everything you want to talk about, whether it's in meeting him, the testing process with him, what you learned, and something you can pass along to the audience that perhaps would be interesting about working with Ralph Vince, a very noted, money management expert on top of expert.
Yeah, we'll do that. And I don't have actually his test in front of me. And in my book, he agreed for me to use his name and give some general understanding of his personality, but these traders didn't want like everything divulged, so there will be some limitations to that. But let me back up a second and just kind of talk about one more thing before we get to Ralph, and then we can use him as an example. So, all right, have you heard of Andrew Lo before?
Yes, MIT professor.
Right, he's a professor at MIT. He's done a lot of research on trading and many different aspects, and very brilliant guy. He actually started looking into this 10 years ago, back in 2005. One thing that he did, he gave the short version of this personality test to a group of traders, and he only had 80 traders in his little group, and then he also measured their performance over about a month period of time. So that's what Andrew did in his test. Now, there were some drawbacks to his. He only had 80 traders. He was only looking at their trading performance over a month. And as everybody knows, anybody can have a bad month or a good month, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they are good long-term traders. And the other thing is he used the short version of the personality test that doesn't break it down into separate facets. All right, like I was saying, the N1, N2, N3. And so he only was looking at the big 5 traits, N, E, O, A, and C. And what he found in his research is that there was no correlation between any of the big 5 personality traits, at least for that 1 month, successful market trading. All right. And so that was kind of like the only person who looked at this idea with any really, scientific mind behind it. What we did is we took a group, dozens of very successful traders who have been basically people my father has known for a long period of time, been successful traders over decades, and we gave them the full version test to see if we could break things out a little bit. And that's where things got interesting. And what we found, again, before we get into Ralph in a second, is we found that one of the most consistent themes in the test was almost everybody was low in trait anxiety, which is the first neuroticism trait, as we were talking about before. Whereas some of the other neuroticism traits like anger and depression and self-consciousness and impulsivity and vulnerability, those are the other ones. They were not necessarily high or low. Somebody could be high in one and low in the other, or middle in the other. That didn't seem to be so much of an issue as being low in the N1 trait. So in Ralph's case, what really stood out in his personality results is that he's really high in N2, which is the anger facet of neuroticism. I don't have his results in front of me. I wasn't necessarily prepared to talk specifically about Ralph, but I remember that was sort of, the main thing that stood out with him is the anger and him working and finding ways to manage anger in trading, and not just specifically trading, but in other aspects of his life. A lot of the times, it's not like one's trading life is removed from all the other aspects of one's life, relationships and other responsibilities, and paying for college, tuition for kids, and all these other things are going on simultaneously. In his case, and in other cases, there were certain traits that were getting in the way, perhaps at times, or at times they were able to find ways to overcome them. But what was most interesting was that consistently, N1, anxiety, low.
Talk about that a little bit more, though. Anxiety low, which just, I mean, essentially like, okay, the daily market activity is hitting you. And whereas some people might get all geared up and they're flipping on CNBC, they've got the adrenaline pumping. I don't know. They're screaming at the dog. I think what you're really saying here is the traders you worked with, none of that stuff. They don't care about that.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go quite that far. I think that, every trader experiences anxiety. Real money is involved. There is anxiety. Every single trader I talked to said, including very successful traders with very low anxiety scores, that doesn't mean they don't have any anxiety. It just means that their anxiety levels are not going to be so profoundly strong that they get in the way with the logical side of executing trades. Again, thinking about the outside part of the brain and the inside part of the brain. They still have anxiety. And in fact, what most of these traders told me, successful traders, is that it's important to have a certain amount or degree of anxiety, right? Just not too much. And that anxiety is really a two-edged sword because, the market, depending, I guess, on your beliefs into, what makes the markets move and tick. If you believe that there are trends in the markets and that the trends are being caused by, investor, emotions and beliefs and all that, behavioral finance, which most people are, pretty much recognizing at this point, you need to be able to be in tune with the emotional cycles of the markets. So it's important to be able to tune into your emotions and know when you're feeling anxious in the markets and to register and correlate it to the emotions of the other traders in the market and the trends in the market, but not to have the anxiety be so overwhelming that it prevents you from executing really what you know is logically the right thing to do in the market. So it's in one degree, anxiety is important to have to a certain level. Jerry Rice, I grew up in Northern California, a big 49ers fan. Jerry Rice, as a football player, talked a lot about anxiety and fear. And I don't have the quote in front of me, but one of his great quotes that he gave when he was inducted into the NFL Hall of Fame was, he said, a lot of these sports psychologists tell you that you need to eliminate anxiety. And Jerry Rice said, no, that's not the goal at all. That's not, at least for him, that's not how he got to be perhaps the greatest wide receiver in the NFL. He said, you need to have a degree of anxiety. That's what pushes you on. It helps you sort of monitor. It's a barometer of what's going on in the game or in the market. So you need a certain degree of it, but you want a very low level of it so it's not overwhelming. So I think that's what the research is telling us, Mike.
You brought up behavioral finance. I would love for some perspective from you, and let me outline where I would love for you to comment on. I look at the work of Daniel Kahneman, Vernon Smith, two gentlemen that have been kind enough to come onto this podcast, guys that have, Kahneman even more well known than Vernon Smith. And they did this fantastic research, this fantastic work. I look at some of the systems traders going back into the 70s, Richard Donchian into the 50s. And I look at some of these systems traders and I think to myself, they didn't get credit for figuring out the behavioral finance, but they actually have the results and the trading that was backing the notion of behavioral finance long before the well-known academics got the awards. I think sometimes
the Nobel Prizes, right?
Right, exactly. I sometimes think that some of the traders have really gotten a short stick here in terms of recognition as to, especially the systems traders, because the systems traders, so much of what they do, it's just their whole entire way of being is almost, to me, like a one-to-one relationship with the very issues that Daniel Kahneman would write about in Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow.
Yes, and if anybody hasn't read his books, I highly recommend them. I'm actually going to be coming out with a book shortly that goes into behavioral finance and cognitive biases, and more specifically, how to manage cognitive biases in trading the markets, and how certain personality traits are connected to certain cognitive biases. It's for decades. There's been dispute about that. I'm not a professional trader by any sense of, and I'm not an expert, okay? But I'm very fascinated in the history finance and people who look at the markets, and it's fascinating. It's like there's great meaning, I think, in the markets, and there's been a debate about that very topic, whether or not there's meaning in the markets for a long period of time. You've heard about the random walk down Wall Street. Even before that work, back in the 70s, there were people back in the 40s and 50s who were asserting that that there's no meaning, or there are no trends, that every price is completely independent from one another, and there's no way to make any sense of the movements in the market. That's one philosophy. Then there have been a number of people who have taken quite the opposite approach. Andrew Lowe actually has done some of the most exciting, mathematically significant research showing that the random walk theory is wrong, that there are statistically things that you can see and trends that you can see. He's looked at it from a very statistical, mathematical look. A lot of people sort of have theories and develop trends or models or systems, but to actually mathematically prove it that it's not a random walk, that whole topic is just fascinating to me. But yes, there are a lot of I would put my dad in that category, and this will kind of segue into another topic that I'd love to talk about. But my dad is known for developing some trading systems and trading indicators, but specifically he's thought of as a systems trader, right? But the interesting thing, and he only realized this after he took this personality test, is that he was great at developing systems, but he was horrible at actually trading the systems.
Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and so one of the big 5 personality traits is conscientiousness, right? And what we found by researching these traders is that traders can be high in conscientiousness and low in conscientiousness, or somewhere in the middle. And that when you sort of look at their trading styles, they break out into 2 distinct camps. You have more systems, rules-based traders, and then you have people who are more discretionary traders. But what's fascinating is that there's a personality, one of the conscientiousness facets, which is the C2 facet, actually predicts which trader is going to be successful at trading in a systems way and which one in a discretionary way. And what my hypothesis is that these successful traders that I've looked at were able to figure that out over time. Most of them probably never had even thought about, what is my personality and how do I match it up with the right trading system. It may have been just a trial and error process where they were able to adapt a trading strategy to their personality. But there are probably a lot of people out there who are struggling with one form of trading and not realizing, hey, maybe that's not, the methodology they should be using. I actually brings to mind a very specific trader that I've been working with who for decades consistently was losing money. He might have a one good trade, and that would kind of give him a little bit of confidence, and then he would have a number of losers, and year in and year out he was losing money, but he wasn't not making any changes to the markets he was trading, how he was trading them, how he was managing his money. He was doing the same thing over and over. We all know Einstein's famous quote about the definition of insanity. But what I think really this personality test does is it really makes explicit sort of some implicit things that we know, but we don't always sort of recognize and really address in our lives. And that's where this test is really helpful, and where the results in the book are really helpful as well. So my dad, it turns out that his C2 score is on the low side. He may have, he has a very, high intellect, and he's very good at developing systems and using computers, but when it comes to actually following the rules of his systems and sticking to them, he could not do it. And whenever he tried, he would lose money doing it. And other people were able to take his systems and make money doing it. And what he developed over the years and years ago, what he developed was the idea that, hey, he better not trade his own systems, but have somebody else trade for him. Now he just uses cloud trading and he's not involved. But that's where he had to sort of make an adaptation to make sure that he wasn't getting burned in the market simply because he was not not fit for actually systems trading itself. He's great at designing and developing systems. It's the sticking to it and not breaking away from his own rules. That's where he was struggling with.
Now, Jason, let me ask, was that a result of you working with him? And I'm going to use a little terminology from your book. Was that a result of some cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yes. Cognitive behavioral therapy, I would never claim to be treating my father because that's unethical. It would be unethical to treat my father or use cognitive behavioral therapy, but the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy are highly effective for managing somebody's anxiety or changing their behaviors when it comes to their trading. Those are exactly the principles we use.
Once one takes the personality test, the NEO, that if there are, and this is my terminology, perhaps you can have different terminology, if there are imbalances, there are ways to get people to think about ways to, perhaps if they're too extreme on the scale, to reel themselves in a little. Would that be a good way to look at it?
Yeah, there are, but it's not a one size fits all. For some people, cognitive behavioral therapy is the way to go. Other people are really much more responsive to, relaxation and, visualization techniques are more helpful for people who are very high in like a trait fantasy and aesthetics, which are two of the openest traits. Those people, I use very different methods to help them than I do with people who primarily are dealing with anxiety, really need just basic cognitive behavioral. Some of the basics of cognitive behavioral are, number one, is you do not want to, when you have something that is fearful, something that's causing anxiety, you do not want to flee from it, because all that does is train your brain that fear was legitimate when it may not have been at all, and that the same anxiety is going to come back the next time you are in the same sort of situation. So that's where something like stop losses comes into play. I recently had a trading coach. I can't use his name, but a trading coach contacted recently. He said, "Hey, Jason, I've got 3, I think it was maybe 4 traders that he was really struggling with." And this is a well-known trading coach. And he said, I'm struggling. I'd like them to take the personality test and see what's going on. So it turned out one of these traders that had really bad anxiety, and he was getting into the classic problems that high anxiety causes in trading, where somebody might be in a good trade, but then they just, a little turn in the market, even though they know better, they exit the trade, and a big winner turns into a small winner very quickly. That's the classic thing, a little anxiety, and you freak out and you exit, and later on you regret it because actually you knew better. So, but it turned out this trader who had been working with this trading coach for years, maybe even decades, trying to figure out why he could not, it turned out this trader had sort of lied to his trading coach and said, "Hey, I'm using stop losses," when actually he hadn't been all along. And the trading coach was astounded that his pupil had been actually lying or misconstruing how he was trading. And so the use of trading stops is huge when it comes to managing anxiety, because again, the whole principle is, like, if you have a dog phobia and you're walking down the sidewalk, you don't want to flee to the other side of the road, to the other sidewalk, because that's just going to reinforce in your brain that all dogs are scary, all dogs are dangerous. You need to kind of confront the anxiety, and then the anxiety will eventually subside the more you do that. It's simply called exposure response prevention. And that's part of cognitive behavioral therapy. We use it with dog phobias. I use it with traders in the markets as well.
Jason, you've been kind enough to give me your time here on a Sunday morning. As I think about the book, the title, The Mental Edge in Trading, it's on Amazon everywhere. People can find it very quickly. Would it be fair for me to think of your work as the mental edge in trading, in life, in relationships, in work, in friendship, in entrepreneurship? It's not just the mental edge in trading in your work, is it?
No, it's really not. And again, I'm not necessarily a trader. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm a physician. It just happens that because my dad is who he is, that this kind of came to life in this manner. But really, all of these lessons, and you know what, Mike? That's what life is about. It's about understanding yourself. When you make a mistake, understand why you made that mistake and how it came to be, and how you can adapt to both your positive physical and psychological traits, and also the negative ones as well, so that you can have a healthy and prosperous life. That's what, sort of maturing and growing up is ultimately all about, is understanding who you are, your place in the world, and adjusting to it in a healthy way. So yes, it's very much, but that's what I think, that the whole arena of trading in the markets is a really fascinating area to look at, specifically because there's so much emotions involved, and it also is the markets are very complex as well, as far as understanding them. Nobody really understands how and why the markets move all the time, obviously. The emotions play such a huge role. It's a great sort of arena to really understand human psychology. I think that people who trade the markets with just the idea that it's all about numbers, they're really losing out on really learning from the markets more about themselves and how to relate to other people. I think then, and I would encourage people to read the next book when it comes out. I think, I get into that a lot more, and that's where I've gained insight. I worked for my dad back in the early 1990s for a couple of years, and I saw his work as all numbers and blips on a computer screen, and I was bored to death, and I left. I didn't want to work for my dad at that point. It looked like a horrible lifestyle to just be looking at numbers on the screen going up and down, and plots of lines and here and there. But now, is with this work that my dad and I have been sharing and working on together, he has a better appreciation of who I am and what I do in my profession, and I have a better understanding of not only what he does, but why it's important to him, and how the markets. He's not doing it just to make money or just to watch numbers on a screen. It brings meaning to his life. It helps him understand himself more, and I think that this personality test, brought it to the next level for him, and I think it can for pretty much any trader. That's where this is all so fascinating.
Jason, as I said, the book is everywhere, easily found. The Mental Edge in Trading. Adapt your personality traits and control your emotions to make smarter investments. Where can people reach you? If they love this conversation and they want to reach out to you, is there a place they can find you? Is it a website or an email address? What's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, no website. I don't market this really. This is just more of a project and that I work on the side. My main gig is working as a psychiatrist in a psychiatric hospital. But I do have an email address. That's the best way. If anybody has any questions, more than happy to answer them. Or if they want to even take the test, I can give them information on how to do that as well. But the best way to reach me is just by email, and it's emaildrj@yahoo, and that's spelled out, EMAIL, and then the word doctor is also spelled out, DOCTOR, and then just the letter J, emaildrj@yahoo.com.
Jason, thank you for taking some time today.
Absolutely, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.